I was just discouraged, and I remember like sitting in my kitchen and I was like, why am I here? I feel like I'm failing. Why am I even here? I just remember being so discouraged. I'm Jess. I am from Colorado, and I live currently in Berlin, Germany. So it was my second month in Berlin, and at this point, I had a lot going on. One of my teammates invited me to go climbing, bouldering specifically, and bouldering is like a form of climbing with no ropes. There's mats on the ground that you fall on. Bouldering and climbing, like, not my thing, but she asked me, and I was like, I want to try this. Like, I feel really good about going. And we're climbing, and she's teaching me all the different techniques, and I actually was loving it. I was having a lot of fun. At one point, I was like trying this route. It was not that far off the ground, but I was like climbing up a little bit, and I reached up with my hand, and it slipped, and I just fell on the mat. And pretty much when I fell, there was this instant pop in my ankle, and I just knew. Like, I landed on the mat, heard the pop, was in tons of pain, and was like writhing on the floor, and I was like, yep, I've done something wrong. Something is wrong. I remember like they tried to help me stand up, and I like the feeling of my ankle just giving out, like, and there was like a hospital, praise God, really close to us, and so I'm like cannot walk at all, and she picks me up, and we start like hobbling over outside to this Uber to go to the hospital. And so that night we spent like probably 4 or 5 hours in the hospital just waiting to be seen. And we're like drinking hot chocolate and talking about faith, which ended up being really sweet. But we're waiting to be seen for my ankle, and I get seen that night and basically told like this is probably some ligament issue. Turns out that I had fractured my ankle and I think partially torn a ligament as well. And he tells me to call this place and to start going to physical therapy as soon as possible. So I'm like, okay, cool. In the middle of like all the language learning, all the things going on, can't walk like at all. I have like elbow crutches, and Berlin is like it's a tough city to be injured in. A lot of apartment buildings don't have elevators, they're really old. A lot of just walking, and so it's kind of a tough city to be injured in. And so for that first week, it was a lot of navigating that for me. I think I missed a whole week of language school, which was really discouraging. I was like trying to get all the prescriptions for like my ibuprofen, because that's a prescription here. Like kind of in an urgent place looking for a physical therapist's office, and I find this one, and they can do exactly what I need, and they can see me that night. So I was like, okay, I'm just gonna send it, because this is the only one I feel like right now that has room and space and can do this urgently. And at this point, my German is like not good enough to do this by myself, but I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to just show up. So I remember I like call an Uber, and I take my crutches, and I'm in so much pain. And I remember it was like 6:30, and I'm like dropped off late at the physical therapist's office, like crying on the sidewalk because I can't walk and I can't find where I am. And I eventually just broke down, and I called my office and I asked them if they spoke English, and the physical therapist was like, yeah, we do. And I was like, I cannot find you, like crying on the sidewalk on my crutches, like, where are you? And he was like tucked all the way back in this little alley, and he comes out, like waves at me. And so I walk in, and I remember that night he was like, okay, I see what you need. I don't do this thing that you need. I can help you strengthen your foot in another way, but I'm going to connect you to my colleague, Jay. And Jay just starts basically doing this like massage on my leg to just kind of drain the fluid that builds up when you injure yourself. So I'm laying on this table for like 30 minutes while we're doing that. We like talk, and it's fine. And then maybe a week later, I'm supposed to go back. And at this point in time, I hit this bump where like my foot was really painful. At this point, I didn't know it was fractured, but it was. And so just still in like a lot of pain. I was so set back with language learning at this point. I was just discouraged. And I remember like sitting in my kitchen, and I was like, why am I here? Like, I just hurt myself. I can't even do what I'm supposed to be doing on a basic level. Like, I can barely get to language school. I feel like I'm failing. Why am I even here? I just remember being so discouraged. And so I go to physical therapy because I'm like, well, I have to go. So I show up in like a pretty discouraged place, and I sit down with my physical therapist, and he's like getting ready to work on my leg, and he was like, what do you do in this city? And for me, the way I've chosen to describe what I do is I usually just say that I work with a nonprofit in the city that supports the German church, because that's what our team does. So I just said, I work with a nonprofit that supports the German Christian church. And he just like looked at me, and I was like, yeah. And he was like, oh. And then made some really funny comment about like, what level of crazy are you talking? Like, and I just giggled, and I was like, oh, okay. And I am somebody, I love conversations about faith. Like, I love, like, if someone disagrees with me or if someone believes something entirely different than me, I am ready for that. Like, I get really energized by those conversations about, like, doubt or questions or belief or, yeah, I love just hearing the perspective of people who see something totally different. I really love that. And so he just kind of teased me, and I was like, I hope not that crazy, but, like, tell me more about what you're saying. And he just so kindly, like, invited me into his story, and told me more of, like, kind of, like, what his background had been with faith. Yeah, just some experiences he'd had with a different, like, religion, and that was, like, a privilege for me, because I know, like, being brought into people's story in that depth, that's rare, and a blessing. And so I was just listening, and I kind of timidly stepped into this place of, like, yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I hear that background, and this is what I believe Christianity is. Like, it's not a faith background of having to earn salvation or having to make my way to God. Like, that's not what I believe, which kind of culminated at the end to me really blatantly saying, like, here's what I think the gospel is. And I think the gospel is God who sent his only son to die for me, because I can't earn my way to salvation. I could never be good enough. Maybe I care about being a good person, but I'm not. Even when I try my best, I fail. Everybody does. So I need the God of the Bible who stepped down and made the way for me to be at peace with him. And I remember we just, like, sat in silence for a minute, and he just looked at me and he was like, thank you for your input. I just remember leaving that day, and I was like, wow, that was, like, the last person I thought I'd ever have that conversation with. That was, like, I didn't try to not go in that day thinking, like, I'm gonna go share my faith. Like, that's not where I was at. I was actually in very much a discouraged place, but getting to just watch how God so naturally opened a door was so encouraging for me, and I was energized by the conversation, and it just reminded me, like, yeah, God, this thing has happened that's so discouraging, but God will use it for good, and he'll allow it to open doors like this, and I wouldn't have met him if this hadn't happened, and I'm so thankful that it did. And I think now leaving that time, like, the door just kind of naturally closed, but I think in reflection, like, it was such a painful and confusing time, but getting to watch how God used it to just bring really honest conversation, and getting to, like, allow me to give, like, yeah, more of a reason for my faith than hearing someone else's story and perspective, and being reminded that, like, anything that happens, God will use for his glory.